she, in the poem that we're going to hear in her own voice, she talks about a definition of life being perhaps the lighting up of a cigarette in the narcotic repose between two lovemakings. This is big stuff. And talks about, mocks marriage in another poem about, describes marriage as a union of sharing of a bed of two names in the dusty pages of a registrar's book. Whereas my relationship with my lover is about the burnt anemone of his kisses and my happy hair. Serious stuff. So that's Furu Farrow, so you can listen to her voice. And she also had a wonderful thing about how voice is the last thing.
همه هستی من آیه تاریکی است که تو را در خود تکرار کنان به سحرگاه شگفتنها و رستنهای ابدی خواهد برد. من در این آیه تو را آه کشیدم آه، من در این آیه تو را به درخت و آب و آتش پیوند زدم. زندگی شاید یک خیابان دراز است که هر روز زنی با زنبیلی از آن می‌گذرد. زندگی شاید ریسمانی است که مردی با آن خود را از شاخه می‌آویزد. زندگی شاید طفلی است که از مدرسه برمیگردد.
آج کے دن نہ پوچھو میرے دوستو، دور کتنے ہیں خوشیاں منانے کے دن، کل کے ہنسنے کے دن، گیت گانے کے دن، پیار کرنے کے دن، دل لگانے کے دن، آج کے دن نہ پوچھو میرے دوستو، زخم کتنے ابھی وقت بسمل میں ہیں، دشت کتنے ابھی راہ منزل میں ہیں، تیر کتنے ابھی دست قاتل میں ہیں، آج کے دن نہ پوچھو میرے دوستو، آج کا دن زبوں ہے میرے دوستو، آج کے دن تو یوں ہے میرے دوستو، جیسے رنج و الم کے پرانے نشان سب چلے سوئے دل کارواں کارواں، ہاتھ سینے پہ رکھو تو ہر استخوان سے اٹھے نالہ علامہ علامہ، آج کے دن نہ پوچھو میرے دوستو، کب تمہارے لہو کے دریدہ علم فرق خورشید محشر سے ہوں گے رقم، از کرا تا کرا کب تمہارے قدم لے کے اٹھے گا وہ بحر خون یم بیم، جس میں دھل جائے گا आज के दिन का गम सारे रंजो अलम सारे जोरो सितम दूर कितनी है खुर्शीद महशर की लो आज के दिन ना पूछो मेरे दोस्तों.
So basically I'm a documentary filmmaker, and I used to write for different newspapers and magazines as a freelance journalist, and one of my main focus was on the lives of Pakhtun women. But I somehow realized that the articles that I was writing were about Pakhtun women, yet they couldn't read them. So I decided to switch over to another medium, which is filmmaking, and I started making documentaries in Pashto language. This was back in 2003. And like for me, feminism is having the freedom to challenge a particular mindset, and that is the patriarchal mindset. So for me to witness that we still were practicing customs like Swara, where girls are given as compensation to end disputes in Khyber Pakhtunkhwa, that I suppose was something that pushed me into this area of feminism. And till that particular time, I thought, okay, all feminists are, anti-men, and I had this very negative kind of an attitude towards feminism.
That I am almost an accidental feminist, because when I was younger, it was not cool to be a feminist, just like you were mentioning earlier, and I thought, women who did not like men were feminists, or women who were lesbians were feminists, and I was like, I'm not either one of those, so I don't fit into this category. Until I read a really beautiful play called The Heidi Chronicles. And I don't know if you guys are familiar with it, but it's about this woman's life in the 80s who has this choice to have a job. And if she has a job and goes down this path of having a career and being really successful, what that in the end ends up meaning for her is that she cannot get married. The guys of her generation are not interested in that. So that's sort of the price that she has to pay for that. And it just really outlined the plight of these women who, before my time, right, sacrificed their lives for the younger generation who could then have the luxury of saying, I can have it all, I can have a career, I can have a husband, I can have an education. And that really changed my views on what feminism meant after I read that play. And then the accidental part comes in here. A few years ago, I wrote a one-woman show. It's titled Dirty Packy Lingerie. And I wasn't really trying to make any statement with the title of the play. It just ended up being, it's made a huge statement, even in America, in the US, and in Europe, in Canada, because the title means a lot of things to people. But it's basically, it was my way of what all of you guys have said. It was just my way of telling these stories about the women and the American Muslim experience, that I wanted to share, that I was seeing. And I think feminism is about choices, having the option. I've been doing a lot of engagements since I've been here in Pakistan, and what I'm finding with a lot of these young girls is that they've never been asked or given an option. And I'm not talking about the elite, I'm just talking about the younger girls in the public schools. And it's just a jarring difference I'm seeing between children here and children in America, because if you tell a child in America to tell you a story, they will go all out. I mean, I work with children there as well, and it's just like, and the aliens came and they ate everybody. That's how a story would end. And here it's really hard I'm noticing that for the girls to even have the confidence to speak. They have trouble when I ask them a question. It's just been really interesting to me. So I think it's just about, giving young girls confidence and young boys' confidence, and just having options for girls to know that they have an option. If they want an education, yes, they can. If they want to stay at home, then yes, that's great too. So yeah, thank you.
I found the title of this talk very interesting. And I think I just met Poppy accidentally for something else, and she said, we're thinking of doing this. And that's why I said, I'd like to do this. Because the title is My Personal Journey to Feminism. And I find that intriguing because I think we're all born feminists. So we're all born humanists. And if we're all born humanists, then we're all born feminists. So somewhere along the way, we lose that. And it's not that you travel towards it. Somewhere along the way, you just travel away from your core. And when you travel away from your core, you travel away from humanism and feminism. And I'm not a huge fan of labels anyways, my life or anybody else's life. But over my life in Pakistan and abroad, it was a discovery as to how labels play a role into forming your social identity, and how we develop such an innate sense of shame about basic rights and basic dignity, and allow our social constructs and our culture to take over who we are as individuals. I am a writer, a film maker, educator, marketer. I do a lot of stuff, social worker, etc., etc. But one thing that enters the room before I enter any place is my gender. And I have no control over it, So before I enter a room, I am not educated or have achieved anything or my professional identity. First of all, I'm a woman. And then it is just twice as hard for me to prove to the man sitting there, or even the woman sitting there, that I am competent. As a professional, that I can reason, that I can get this done. And since our childhood, I think girls, especially in our culture, are taught that you can't do a lot of things. So even if you can, you start believing that you can't. And somewhere in your adulthood and your awareness, it really hits you that you can. Or somebody confronts you with it. And then there is another conflict. And I think that is a huge struggle.
Well, just building on what Aisha said about, we are born feminist, but then we move away from it. I met that label much later, but I grew up in a house which was really as free of discrimination as one can be. We were daughters, but I never heard anyone longing for a son. I had an aunt who would regularly make girls' clothes every time she was pregnant, hoping that she would have a girl. Our playmates were those boys who certainly had no sense of superiority, given that every time their mother was wishing for a girl. So I grew up in that kind of a household, went to the convent, again an all-girls environment. After that, went to an all-women's college in the States. And so at the core, for me, having experienced discrimination-free environments, such as in my house and in the place of learning, for me it was part of a sort of unassailable core that I was equal. And that was something that was not up for debate. At the same time, somewhere around my teenage, I started becoming aware of the challenges that women were facing, whether it was in Pakistan or in other societies, because societies as we know them today are patriarchal to varying degrees, but all of them are patriarchal. And when I met this label that was in the States, feminist, I immediately thought, yes, that is what I am. I never associated it with hating men. I never associated it with violence. I associated it with carrying this belief that women are equal as human beings to men in every possible way. Now, what also happened was, because I had a great interest in Islam, in Sufism, in Buddhism, and was very deeply attracted by the spiritual, ethical dimensions. Now, by the time I was around 18, and I started, in fact, studying more deeply at Bryn Mawr with Sayyid Hussain Nasser and Michael Sells, the ethical and spiritual dimensions of Islam, I suddenly came face to face with the gender roles and social realities that were also seen as stemming from Islam, and that appeared to me to be highly discriminatory. And for me, that became a core struggle. How do I reconcile, on the one hand, my belief that women and men are equal as human beings, with this attraction that I had to the spiritual and ethical dimensions of Islam? This journey began then. It began then with the rejection. So I said, okay, if Islam is promoting discrimination, gender discrimination, I really don't want anything to do with it. So there was a break. And yet the ethical, spiritual aspects continued to attract me. When I came back to Pakistan, worked with Simur on issues of rape, started teaching at Kinnaird College, and by that time, feminism, looking at the way women were portrayed in literature, all that had been part of my training, part of my education. I then moved to development, and I was still struggling with this issue. When I came to development, it became very clear that there was again a whole set of belief which was limiting choices for women, giving them a secondary status, and again, that was considered to be rooted in Islam. It was, Naseem and I started consulting together, started working on gender together, and then from then onwards, there was a growing recognition. And I think the turning point for me was reading Amina Wadood Mohsin's book, Women in Islam. Because up to that point, I had just imbibed and bought hook, line, and sinker the patriarchal interpretations of Islam that were widespread and unchallenged. And with that, once I started discovering how one could unread those patriarchal interpretations, started working on development, seeing that there was, unless we challenged the patriarchal interpretations of Islam, we were not going to create the kind of space that we need to create in Pakistan for men and women to enjoy equal status and freedom of opportunities.